Good morning and welcome to this video where we're going to discuss democracy as I understand it. So we'll be starting with what we mean when we say democracy, then moving on to how it applies to modern day governments with a bit of an emphasis on British government because I'm British, that's the government I know, and it's apparently having issues with democracy, so people keep telling me. So here we are. So we're trained to believe that democracy is this zenith of what modern civilization can and should be. But I can't help thinking nobody necessarily stops to wonder what democracy actually is and whether that's actually a good thing. So let's just start with the really simple version of democracy, the really naive interpretation of it. Rule by the people. If we think about that for just a moment, give it any consideration, we're going to realise that is not the government that we live under. Not really how any modern governments work. When was the last time that you as a person contributed to a decision about the governing of your country, about how a law was passed? It actually goes deeper than that as well, because when was the last time that you had any part in deciding what road surface would get used on your local highway or which dinner person would get employed at your local primary school? Because these are all decisions and actions a government has to take. They're all part and parcel of governing a country. And I don't think many people, if any, would seriously try arguing that each one of those decisions should be put to a vote. But why wouldn't they argue that? This is the internet after all. One of the rules of my channel is that you have to let people pick their own hills, that there are too many issues for any one person to worry about. Modern civilization can only exist because we have multiple people doing multiple different things, dividing up the knowledge and the labour so we can all do what we do well and trusting that everybody else is doing what they do well. So if there's all these parts to governing, that makes it a full-time job, and that means it would be detrimental to society as a whole if we were all doing that, because then we wouldn't have time to do the other things that we need to be doing. This is where you can also slot in an argument about why it's really stupid to think that everybody should be a subsistence farmer, assuming you want the nice things that come with modern civilization. Simple enough. So who does need to be in charge if we can't all be in charge? Plato thought about this quite a bit, and he came up with the idea of the philosopher king. And you may think, yeah, of course he came up with that because he's a philosopher and he wants to be king. But no. The philosopher king is somebody who is humble and cares about knowledge and the people, and with those qualities will rule with compassion and understanding. Brilliant. But here you run into the obvious problem. What happens to people who disagree with the philosopher king? Well, balls. Looks like we've just made Soviet communism happen. And we were doing so well. And this is kind of why we wanted democracy in the first place. If we want everybody to work together to build a better country, then either we have to abandon the part of the population that disagrees with us, or we need to figure out a way to make everybody feel like they have contributed to the decision-making process, like their thoughts and their situation are being taken into account, and that some sort of consensus has happened. All right then, so what we need is the utility of the philosopher king, but with everybody being happy. Luckily, the world seems to have an answer for this, and that answer is representative democracy. So what we do is we have people who have chosen their hill, and their hill is making laws and choosing the people who govern us. Now remember I said this is how the UK does things. Other countries do directly elect their governors. Britain does not. Britain elects its legislators and they elect the governors. But regardless of where you are, at some point you will have the elected people having to choose people that did not get elected for the same reasons as everything before, just further down the line. So how do you involve the people in that process? Well, fundamentally, there's two ways you can do this. One way would be to have career philosopher kings. These are going to be people, they are your governors. They are going to go out to the people and ask them how they want to be ruled, what they would like to see in government. So they can go back to Parliament and enact a decent mix of those ideas. The other way to do it is to instead have a load of people who all have different ideas on how to govern the country. Everybody gets to look at those people and say, I think this person is the person who is going to best embody what I want from a government. And if everybody agrees on one person, then that person gets to be the philosopher king. Something along those lines. So which is better? Now, it seems to me that it is much easier to do the latter, having the pool of people that everybody chooses from, instead of the former, where you have one person going around asking everybody in the world what they should do. Because it doesn't take too long for everybody to have a look at however many people have decided that they are fit to run the place and say, this is the person that I agree with. But it takes a literal eternity for one person to go around everybody and find out what they think, because they'd have to keep doing it as people change their minds, and it would be entirely unworkable. And this is one of the biggest problems, both with the British Parliament and with democracies around the world. Both the Parliament itself and the people not understanding which version of democracy they are in. And it's easy to tell which one you're in if you have a system with parties, and those parties have a manifesto and you can read it and see what they think and what they plan to do. Then you are obviously in the latter one. You are obviously choosing from a pool of representatives to represent you as they promise they will represent you. And once you have that system, it helps nobody for anybody to then say, we're going to do this because this is what the people want us to do. They always have to say, we are going to do this because this aligns with the principles that we said to the people that we would run the government by. So as soon as anybody changes what their party is going to do for the will of the people, they are willfully subverting democracy. Now, that isn't to say that you can't have clinics. So when constituents come to lawmakers to tell them what's going on with their lives, what are their problems, they're not trying to convince them on how to govern the country. They are letting them know the state of the country. It is then up to the lawmakers to make decisions about how to govern the country in line with their principles, so as to fix the problems that the country is having, if they agree that they are problems in the first place. And this is going to be an essential part of preventing a capital city bubble, where the lawmakers just know about what they know about and don't know about the rest of the world. They need to be in contact with the rest of the world, but not in that way of going around every single house and trying to work out every single person's ideas, you know. But this does, of course, gloss over a big problem, and it's one that Britain has historically hated addressing. It is one which is destroying the US government from within at the moment. And that is, what happens if everyone hasn't agreed? Let's put this out here right now. We are not talking about proportional representation. Not yet. What we're going to do is we're going to pretend that if you have over 50% of the vote, that must mean that you deserve 100% of the power, because that's pretty much how Britain works at the moment. That may seem absurd, but it's also what the British government does, so let's run with it. Which means that your problem is actually only when the winning party hasn't got over 50% of the vote, because that means that they don't have the 100% mandate that we've just talked about, and therefore they have a 0% mandate. So now we declare kingmakers. So that's what the previous government had in the Liberal Democrats. That's what the current government has in the DUP. And what that means is that we have two parties that are fundamentally opposed to each other, and they're apparently going to come together to create a ruling party that gets things done. And you know what? That should be easy. All you have to do is get them to negotiate middle ground. But not actually middle ground, because, you know, one of the parties has a larger mandate, and therefore it should be, you know, a proportional amount of ground that they get. And that's the view that the Lib Dems took. What you saw was conservative policies, but clearly tempered by Liberal Democrat principles. And what happened? All of the Lib Dem supporters lost their shit. How dare that tiny part of the coalition not wave their massive tie-breaking dick all over the place and show everybody that they're such big boys that can make government unworkable, which is rather the problem. It means that if you believe that over 50% is what you need for the 100% mandate, then that means you have to keep running your elections until somebody gets over 50%. Because otherwise what you're saying is that compromise is a valid form of government. And once you say that compromise is a valid form of government, then if you have 60% Conservatives and 40% Labour, then why aren't all laws 60% Conservative and 40% Labour? Which isn't to say that 60% of your law should be Conservative and the other 40% should be Labour, but rather every law should look like it's got 60% Conservative input and 40% Labour input, right? Being that that's clearly the amounts of the country that believe in those things, right? How we actually get to that point, I couldn't tell you. If you put me on the spot, I'm going to say maybe insist on all laws having a qualified majority. Say that everything needs to have a 70% consensus. And what you'd end up with maybe is nothing happens. You get absolute deadlock for a while, and eventually people work out that deadlock's bad, and they work out that compromise is good. And they act like adults, and they come up with compromises. They come up with things that properly reflect everybody's views to a reasonable amount, because they'd have to if they want to get anything done at all. And who's going to vote for people who get nothing done? Imagine people voting for a party that worked on a platform of we're just going to not turn up and get nothing done. That'd be ridiculous. But I think that's all we've got time for today. We've gone through why we want democracy. We've looked at how democracy works, at least in Britain, and we've addressed how it should work and how it would work if we were actually sticking to the principles that government seems to be built on. So whether you agree with all that is something else entirely, so please do let me know in the comments whether you agree, whether you disagree, whether there is something you would like to see government striving towards with regards to democracy, and most importantly, why do you think those things? And in the meantime, I'll go come up with more videos, shall I? Yes, I shall.